and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be explaining about the day in the life of an air hostess. If you've watched my previous videos, you will know that I used to be cabin crew. And a lot of people ask me what it's actually like to be cabin crew and what happens during the flights and what happens during turnaround. And they just want to know more, really. So I thought that it would be interesting to take you on a journey of the day in the life of a flight attendant or cabin crew. So I've picked a fictitious flight to Paphos in Cyprus, and we will begin today's flight by thinking about the flight time, so what time the flight leaves. So we're going to say that the flight leaves at 7 o'clock in the morning, which means that we may have to get up as early as 3:30 in the morning, depending on where we live, how far we live from the airport, and also bearing in mind that we may have to take a short bus journey from the car park to the terminal building where the crew room is, and there may be hold-ups on the way. So we need to be thinking about all of this because obviously we can't be late for the check-in. If you do like my videos and my channel, then I would be really grateful if you would subscribe to my channel and give my videos a like, because that would really help the channel to expand. So my first experience working as cabin crew was working for a company called Air Europe, and I was based out of Gatwick Airport. I lived about 20 minutes from the airport, so it wasn't too bad. And then I had probably a 10 or a 15-minute journey by bus from the car park to the crew room. So once I reached the crew room, I entered and had to check in with the officers, where I had to show my passport. Yes, cabin crew also have to take their passports wherever they go, and my ID. They would also then check our appearance. So for the ladies, they would make sure that if you had long hair, it was tied back in a ribbon or in a bun. They would also make sure that your uniform was looking its absolute best. You were wearing it correctly. It was crease free, no ladders in tights, and shoes were clean. Once all the formalities were over with, they would give you the table number for where your crew were actually sitting, and you then had to go through a flight briefing. This is where you would meet the rest of the crew. You may not know them if you're new, or you may know some of them, so you introduce yourself. The number one would then give details of the flight time, the flight crew names, so the captain and the first officer, and then all of the cabin crew names as well. So the number one is the manager of the flight on that particular day. So they will be in charge of all of the cabin crew and the cabin service that will be delivered. So the number one is known by other names as well, such as cabin crew manager and purser, and British Airways have cabin services director, which I've spoken about before in my previous videos. So as I said, they will go through the service of the flight. So normally you start with drinks, then a meal, and then back in the day we used to do hot towels, and then we would do duty free, and then if it's a long flight, the first one is, we would then probably do another drink service. So the number one would then give out the positions that everybody would work on that flight. So following on from the number one, there's a number two who's second in command. They don't have these on all airlines, but when I worked for Air Europe, TEA, they both had number twos. So after the number two, there's a number three, a number four, and a number five. So depending on the type of aircraft that you're flying on, this determines the amount of cabin crew that you have on board. So following on from that, the cabin crew manager, or the number one, would ask each cabin crew member a question. So this could either be a first aid question, or it could be a question about the safety procedures that you would follow in an emergency landing, or the operation of some type of emergency equipment, or the operation of some kind of first aid equipment. And you were expected to be able to answer the question correctly and confidently. The number one would support you and help you to answer the question, but if you really couldn't answer it, and this did happen while I was working as cabin crew, you could actually be grounded, because if you don't know the answer to a safety question or a first aid question, then this questions whether you would actually be able to administer first aid to a passenger if they were ill, or if you were actually able to operate a certain type of equipment, first aid equipment, if somebody became ill or in an emergency situation. So once the briefing was complete, you would then go to the aircraft. So this would mean going through security, the same as the passengers, and then you would board the aircraft. Once on board, you would stow your cabin baggage in the overhead lockers, and you would begin the checks that you were expected to do for whatever position you were actually flying as that day. So this could mean checking the safety and emergency equipment, checking first aid equipment, or you could be in the galley checking that you had the correct catering and that you had all the correct stores for the toilets, and that the toilets were actually stocked adequately for the flight. Soon after this, the cabin crew manager, or the number one, would tell you that the passengers were on their way. So you then had to be ready to greet the passengers in a friendly manner, as I said before, with a friendly smile on your face, and be ready to help the passengers with their luggage, putting it into the overhead lockers, and helping any children, and just maybe having a little bit of a conversation with them. For passengers who are seated at the overwing exits, you would have to make sure that all of their baggage was put into the overhead lockers for the duration of takeoff and landing. But at this point, you were just concentrating on takeoff, because the people who sit at the overwing exits have to be able-bodied, because they have to open the overwing exits in an emergency situation. So they have to be able-bodied, and they also can't have any baggage hanging around on the floor, as this could obviously be an obstacle. During the boarding, the number one, or the cabin crew manager, or another member of the cabin crew will carry out onboarding announcements, so welcoming the passengers on board, telling them what the aircraft type is, and maybe what the flight time is, the actual boarding process. So once the ground staff have told the number one that everybody is on board, then they will do a head count of all passengers to make sure that we do have everybody on board. If there's anybody missing, then they will relay that back to the ground staff, who will then have to go back to the departure lounge and search for the passengers, which I've had to do when I was working at British Airways on the ground quite a few times. So I see it from both sides. So once all of the passengers are on board, then the number one will close the front door, and also the rear door will be closed if that was open. And the number one will ask for the cabin crew to arm their slides and cross-check. What this means is you are actually putting the slide into place. So you then have to cross-check that you have actually done that with your opposite cabin crew member. The number one will then pass this check on to the captain. During this time, the captain or the first officer may also do an announcement, just telling the passengers some information about the flight. Again, they may talk about the flight time and the aircraft type, and just a little bit of information. So if the safety demonstration isn't going to be done by video, then this will be carried out by certain members of the cabin crew. So they will take up their positions down the aisle of the aircraft, and they will carry out the safety demonstration for the passengers. And obviously the cabin crew like the passengers to take note and to watch and observe what the cabin crew are doing in case there is an emergency situation where the passengers would have to put on their masks, their oxygen mask, or put on their life jackets and leave the aircraft. So it is important that the passengers do actually take note of the demonstration. So once the safety demonstration has finished, then the cabin crew will perform a check that all passengers have got their seatbelts fastened, they have got their armrests down, their tray tables up, and their seat backs in an upright position. They will recheck the overwing exits to make sure that there's no baggage that has suddenly appeared there, and make sure that that's back in the overhead lockers. In the meantime, the number 2 will be checking the galley, the number 1 will be checking the front galley to make sure that that is all secure. Once the seatbelt check and the cabin secure check has been passed to the number 2 will then phone the number 1 and say the cabin is secure at the rear. Then the person who is checking the seatbelts, etc. from the front will tell the number 1 that the cabin is secure from the front. Number 1 then will pass the cabin secure check to the captain and the first officer, and you will prepare for takeoff. So for takeoff, you go to your designated seat and you strap yourself in.